Shalom and good morning. My name is Anna Elliott. I'm the creator and founder of HomeschoolingTorah.com, and this week we are having a special anniversary celebration. Homeschooling Torah has been in existence for 13 years, and over that time, I have seen a lot of parents that really struggle with the idea that maybe they don't feel like they're qualified to teach their children. Now, I have been, by the grace of Yah, been allowed to study teaching for, gracious, probably 35 years. No, longer than that, probably 40 years. And the reason is I took one of those little tests in high school where they try to help you find your spiritual gifts. Mine came up as teaching. I used to set up all my little stuffed animals as a child and teach them lessons. And I used to make my friends sit down and have a class and I would teach them. And when that came up in my spiritual gifts, I thought, I don't actually know how to teach. So I resolved to find out how to be a good teacher. And I've taken many, many courses, college classes, as well as just piles of books, have read on current educational theory, and as well as I've gone back into history and understood how great teachers from the time of, Yeshua all the way forward have said how to teach. And I've studied Yeshua himself. How did he teach? How did he reach an audience? What does the Torah say? And honestly, when we came to Torah in 2007 and past, I was just overwhelmed at how much information is given in the Torah, especially the book of Deuteronomy, on how to be a teacher. So for today's session, I wanted to go back into our archives and find the very best conference videos that we have recorded on how to teach. The ones today are actually 2 sessions, and I'm going to pile them into one. Okay, so it's going to be long. It's going to be a little over 2 hours, and we're going to take a break in the middle so you have a chance to use the bathroom or whatever. I'm going to be here in the comments to answer your questions the entire time. This was not one of the most popular videos that we have put out because they're really meaty. But I think that in these videos is the actual heart of everything that we do at Homeschooling Torah, and any parent can learn to become an excellent teacher. It's not just those that got a little quiz score saying you're a great teacher, but everyone has the ability to teach their children what the Torah says and how to incorporate it into their children's lives. This isn't just for certain people. This is for everyone. It's for you. So I wanted you to hear that first and tell you why I chose this session, or these 2 sessions, above all the other ones that we've done. You can be a great teacher, Mom, Dad, and this is why we're posting this today. I'll be in the comments. If you have any questions, let me know. Shalom. Shalom and welcome to the 2021 Homeschool Family Conference. Good morning, Boker Tov, as they say in Hebrew. Today, we're going to start teaching you how to teach. So this session is called How to Teach, but it's just part 1. So we're going to come back this afternoon for part 2. My name is Ann Elliott, and I'm the creator and founder of HomeschoolingTorah.com. And when I was in high school, I went to a little Christian school, and we had the privilege of kind of fine-tuning our electives. If we wanted to learn something, they would try to find a parent in the school that had a little knowledge in that, and they'd bring them in and make up a class for even if it was 1 or 2 people. And it was just such a cool thing that they did that for us. For instance, there was a gentleman that came in and taught mechanical drawing and drafting to the boys. And there were 3 boys in his class, and they, went on to use those skills in life. It was just really cool. I wanted to be a teacher. I, at that point, thought that that's what I was going to go to college for, elementary education. And so how do you learn that in high school? Well, we had a teacher down in the elementary grades who loved to teach herself. And she said she would make a class for me. And so basically, she got a free teacher aid every day during this certain period. And I got a course in how to teach. Now, to do that, she got a textbook, and this textbook was from the 1800s, and it was by a man named John Milton Gregory. It was called The 7 Laws of Teaching. And over the course of the year, while grading papers and making bulletin boards and helping take the kids on bathroom breaks and learning how to teach things like, a history lesson or a science lesson, every single day. She also gave me assignments in this book, and we didn't really have time to discuss because she was actually teaching, but she would have me write down little essays based on what I read in this book. Well, I wanted to share the book with you because it's so good, and it's old and it has been reprinted by many different people. So I'm going to give you a link down below the video to a link on Amazon where you can get it for Kindle, but there are many people that have published this book. So I'm sure you can find it possibly even for free. So I'm going to steal a few of the laws of teaching from Mr. Gregory and give you a little spin on my opinion of how they work in a homeschool situation. So to get started, I want you to think about the fact that our children have the capacity to learn, and they also have to have the acquisition of experience. Now, what in the world am I talking about? To get started, you have to even understand what learning is. Learning is you have the capacity to learn. That's your body grows, your mind gets bigger, neurons are formed. This is like a very physical thing that takes place in the world. Laws of development and how your body grows and how your children, gradually get the ability to, get new skills. That's one part of learning. And some of it kind of happens, but you can definitely develop those skills so that they have a greater capacity for learning. We would call this training. And in an earlier video, we talked about how training is taking the head of a child and turning it in a certain direction, like physically moving them trains their neurons to go in that direction. It's very much like learning, as we said, to eat baby food on a spoon. The physical action of, and it's not that easy. Think about it. Dip a spoon into a baby food jar. I don't know, people might not use baby food jars anymore, not a pouch, but a baby food jar. Get it in there, and the baby has to manipulate that spoon to their mouth. And if I did this as an adult, I have to do it very dignified, but they have to get it in their mouth and not spill it all down the front of them. And they hardly got anything. And it's basically like one massive training session to have the capacity to eat. Well, that's what a lot of education is giving our children the capacity to learn by giving their physical body the help, moving them in certain ways so that they can learn. We're going to talk about some ways to do that. Secondly is actually teaching, and that's to acquire experience. You have to understand, knowledge is not just this thing out in the universe. Knowledge is where one human being learned something and passed that knowledge on to the next person. So if you were Adam and Eve, have you ever thought about the fact of who figured out that inside a coconut, you could find like this milky stuff, and then there's hard stuff, and what are you going to do with it? I mean, who is the first person that came up with eating the poisonous insides, or I should say the insides of a plant, the outside be poisonous and the inside is good for you? Like, who's the person that died to get that knowledge for us? How did they discover which plants were good to eat and which plants were not? Which animals were awake in the daytime and which ones were not? Which ones would chase you and which ones would not? Obviously, a lot of people went through a lot of struggle to acquire that knowledge, and then we've passed it down for 6,000 years. Like, we don't want to lose this knowledge because otherwise we have to learn it ourselves, and we call that the school of hard knocks. We don't want to do that. Okay, that's no fun. We don't want our children to learn everything themselves. If they have to learn it themselves, that's just so much more difficult. Why not have them learn it from another human being? And we call that knowledge. And to pass on our knowledge, limited though it may be, to another person is called teaching. Okay. That may be our own personal knowledge of things that work for me and my things that my family did that I don't want to be forgotten, but it's also the acquired knowledge of all humanity. There are so many branches of knowledge, and it's not only what happens, but how that piece of knowledge was discovered, that needs to be passed on. What was developed after that. Like, for instance, we know peanuts are yummy, but I think it was George Washington Carver and took peanuts and made a ton of inventions from them. How he took that knowledge and developed it. And then those inventions made in the 1800s have been perfected all the way to now. Now we could probably add electronics and computers and satellites and robotics and all of these things to the inventions he made. And so as knowledge goes through all of that transformation, there's a lot more information that has to be passed on to the next generation. So in order for children to be both trained and taught, they have to first have a love of learning, and then they have to have the ability to seek out and to study things on their own, because there is not enough time in the 20 years that they're in your home for you to pass on all the world's knowledge. You don't even have all the world's knowledge to pass on. So you don't want to just give them a love for learning, but you want to give them the skills to continue learning the rest of their life, so that if they need to do something, they can study it out on their own or find other teachers who are able to teach them. Teaching is the communication of experience. It is painting in the mind of somebody the picture that is in your mind. Okay, let me say that in a better way. I'm imagining a tall cylinder. It's yellow. It's metal. It has a top that I can flip up, and inside is cool liquid with just a hint of lemon. I'm picturing my water bottle, okay? I have to take that picture that's in my mind and transfer it over to you. And if I do that, that's teaching, okay? I have to paint at that picture. And I like that picture of painting, because I'm thinking of George Ross. Is that what his name is? Anyway, the famous painter with the big curly hair. And he paints, and it's just little tiny pieces. And he dabbles with the paintbrush and adds a little snow, adds a little green and a little blue. And by the end of it, it's a gorgeous scenery. Bob Ross, that's his name. So as Bob Ross does that, he's taking all those individual pieces and he's painting this picture. And that's what a teacher does. It's really cool. You have to reproduce also the experiences, not just the picture in my mind, but the actual experiences I have been through, and make it common between me and my students, my children. So if there's been something that I've experienced in my life, I can help them experience it without ever experiencing it, and save them the misery of maybe the mistakes that I made. So I'm going to give you a few laws. We're just going to go through 3 of them today, or in this session. And in the next session, we're going to give you some more. The first is the law of the teacher. And this law states that a teacher must know the subject matter in order to teach it. Okay. You have to have knowledge of something, or you can't teach it. I can't describe to you my water bottle if I've never even seen my own water bottle. I cannot describe to you a painting by Bob Ross if I've never seen a picture of Bob Ross's painting. I have to know it, or I can't teach it. And this is the biggest thing that I think keeps people from wanting to homeschool, because they say, I don't know algebra. How am I going to teach it? I don't know how to teach all those things that they're obviously really smart out there at the school district office. I'm not that smart. I didn't go to school to be a teacher. I went to school to be an accountant, or maybe I never even went to school. How am I going to teach my kids? I can give you some confidence. Well, hold on. But I do want to say there is some truth to this. You can't teach something if you don't know it. You can't make something come out of nothing. Okay. And the levels of knowing something, there are levels, and you can get away with this, but let's see how good of a master teacher we can make you, because a baby teacher, maybe me in high school when I was trying to help out in that classroom, they have a faint recognition of a topic. So if I were going to teach about electricity, I have a faint recognition. I know the positive end of a battery from the negative end, and I kind of get the gist of what happens. So I could kind of teach that. Okay. If I were a little bit higher of a teacher, I'd have the ability to describe that to others. So I could take a battery and go in front of a class or in front of my children and explain all the circuitry that makes it happen. Okay. I have the ability, and maybe my ability is limited, so I might have to read it from a book, but I could understand it. A higher level than that of a teacher has the ability to explain it, prove it, illustrate it, tell stories from their own life about it, apply it to some other area of life. Like they know it. Like they really know it. This is what you hope your doctor is before he goes into surgery. You hope that he can explain what he's going to do and tell you stories about how it's there. And he's been studying it for a long time. And finally, and this is interesting, when you really know a subject, the master of all teachers doesn't just know it, but they actually have had that knowledge change their own conduct. That's the goal of learning. So a surgeon could know that good nutrition is important, and they could probably teach about it and give illustrations. But unless that surgeon is eating good nutrition at home, they don't really know it as well as they should, do they? It hasn't changed their behavior. So that's the goal of all learning. That's where you want to get your kids. And I'm not going to say you're going to be perfect in all areas. Of course you're not. But you can improve. So again, imperfect knowledge means imperfect teaching. You might have to accept that at the beginning and work on your knowledge levels. If you're going to start teaching here for homeschooling in just a couple of weeks, you're not going to have time to become a master in that amount of time. But just being aware of the fact that you have imperfect knowledge lets you know where some of your weaknesses are and can help you kind of stabilize all of that. If you are fired with enthusiasm for a subject, that will inspire your students, even if your knowledge is not quite on the level of a master. And in a way, what you know about it has changed your conduct, even if you don't know everything about it. So why do you want to teach your children math? Well, it's state law. That's not going to fire anyone up with enthusiasm. I'm not saying you have to be enthusiastic equally. You don't have to be enthusiastic equally about every subject every day, because you're just human and nobody has that much energy. You do have to be enthusiastic enough about the subject when you talk about it that you inspire them to want to learn. And that goes for math or chemical bonds or what King George did in England when he went off to battle. It doesn't matter what the subject is. Try to find something that makes you feel enthusiastic about it, and it will help the students learn. One of the ways you can do that is before you start to teach something, give a little fresh study to it. So are you going to teach about chemical bonds? Well, just look it up in something. I like having books on my shelf that are helpful for this, like little, I'm going to show you one for chemistry real quick. So the chemistry book wasn't on the shelf. Probably one of my kids was enthusiastic about it and they took it off and they're looking at it. I hope so. This one is the Usborne Illustrated Dictionary of Biology. So instead of chemical bonds, let's talk about the circulatory system. So if I'm going to teach about the circulatory system, maybe I can pull a book off my shelf that day that will just give me a little bit of understanding. But it really probably won't have tons of enthusiasm unless I actually know how that changes my life. So during COVID, we found out that someone that's infected with the COVID virus, they're impacted in their circulatory system. So I could easily become passionate about that. I don't want to have you get COVID because it could affect your circulatory system. And we could have a great discussion around the table and I get on my soapbox about COVID. That enthusiasm will pass to my students. And now when we sit down to study that lesson about the circulatory system, I think we'll all have a little bit of a context as to why we're learning it. And that enthusiasm can cover a lot of mistakes. That enthusiasm is why we feel inspired when we listen to certain teachers. That enthusiasm is why we admire them. And we're like, man, I wish I could be like that teacher. It's probably because they're enthusiastic. Another thing, like I just said about the circulatory system, you can tie unfamiliar things that you're teaching your student to familiar things that they already know, and it will increase their enthusiasm, just like I just said. If you're not sure how to do that, how to get that enthusiasm or how to tie it together, you could take some time to send a text off to a friend, talk to your spouse, say, how would you teach this? Why are we even teaching it? What do you think? Have those kinds of discussions together. And, if you're on a group of teachers online and on social media, or you're part of our Homeschooling Torah community forum, you can come in there and say, you know what, I looked ahead. I see we're going to be teaching the circulatory system. I have no idea where to start. And I don't even understand why this is important. And I don't get the vocabulary. What would you do? And let other people come in and help you. I would advise starting with your best friend, your spouse, and getting some, good discussions about why you should teach this to your children. Okay. Don't forget to write down your thoughts as you learn from other people and get ideas, because when you get in front of the kids, you might forget. So that's the law of the teacher, that when we teach something, if we don't know it and if we're not enthusiastic about it, why are they going to care? And that's really not why we're doing school. The second law that we're going to talk about today is the law of the learner. The learner has to attend with interest to the material to be learned. Now, that was written like something from the 1800s. That's exactly how Mr. Gregory worded it. Attend with interest. Pay attention with great interest to the material to be learned. So you are not only the one who has to be enthusiastic as a teacher, but your student has to be enthusiastic to want to even be there. Now, there's a couple ways you can do that. You can get their interest and attention by like how TV does it. If you've ever been walking through your local discount store and you're going by the electronics department and the TVs are flashing some new movie and your eye is drawn to it, you had no action of your will involved. They just caught you. They caught your eye. They caught your emotions, and you're paying attention. But you really could care less about that movie, and that attention is probably going to be short-lived. TV and our media use this constantly. There's no effort of my will. It was just presented to me and they went after all my senses and they caught me. Music was great, that's called passive attention because I didn't do anything to become interested in that topic. I think one of the key places this happens around here is when we're putting gas into the pump. And now all the gas stations have ads that as soon as you start pumping gas, the ads turn on. And whether you wanted to or not, you're going to pay attention because they've done everything in their power to make you interested in it. And you're nothing else to do, pumping gas. That's not really the most ideal situation. A lot of online curriculum, I think, try to go with this, and they have like flashing animation and really fun games on your internet or online. And it can get old because you didn't choose to be interested, and they are having to do all the work to interest you. When we used to teach kids in children's church a long time ago at our local church, it felt like sometimes we were up there and putting on a great big show to try to get the attention. We got the puppets and we got the cool music and we got the songs with emotions and we've got candy. We're going to throw it if you know your verse. And yet that's passive attention. And that's really not the best way to teach something because there's no desire on the part of the student to actually learn what you're teaching them. The second kind of attention is active attention, where the mind is controlling rather than being controlled. And we talked a lot about this yesterday in session 4 about self-control. This is pure self-control. The student has chosen to go to college. They are paying a lot of money to be in that class, this English literature class that they don't care about. And they will pay attention because they paid a lot of money. That's attention, and that is self-control is needed, and they're choosing to be there. They're choosing to do what must be done in spite of the fact they'd rather be doing anywhere else. They'd rather not be doing that right now. Something that is more pleasant, more attractive will try to pull them away, but this person is disciplined, and I hope your students have great self-discipline. We talked a lot about it, but the fact of the matter is that's still not the ideal way to learn something. To really learn it, if you have to apply your self-control so hard to stay there, even though you'd rather be anywhere else, that's great. I'm glad you're disciplined, but that's not ideal. The most ideal kind of attention and way to learn something is what Mr. Gregory would call secondary passive attention. But let me explain it a little bit. It's when you're so absorbed in what you're learning that the thing itself attracts you because of it's attractive all on its own. So this would be, I'm learning midwifery. This is something that I've always wanted to learn. And, when I'm older, 15, 20 years from now, and my kids are grown and I have grandchildren and maybe I'll retire a little bit from some of my other things, I would love to maybe dabble a little bit in being a midwife. So out of pure love of the subject, I bought Varney's midwifery textbook. That's like 600 pages. And I have a lot of other midwifery textbooks. And I love in the evening when I'm not doing work and no more chores, I'll just pull a 600-page college textbook off the shelf on my own because I'm attracted to the subject and I really want to learn about it. And a lot of us came to Torah this way. No one stood over us and said, you must learn the Torah. And we went, okay, I will, out of my own self-discipline. No, the Holy Spirit attracted us to it so much so that nothing could peel us away from it. We wanted to open our Bible and learn about it, no matter, forget supper. I could care less about supper. I'm going to read about Torah. That's the secondary passive attention. That's why I didn't think the name was really very helpful. It's when we're just attracted to something, we're absorbed in it. We can't think about anything else. That's the goal. That's what we wish our kids would be for every subject. And of course, realistically, they're not going to be, but you want to try to get them interested in learning for the sake of learning itself, but they love learning. Now, again, you're not going to get there just automatically, and it's not going to happen all the time. It is not easy to pay attention to things. And the fact of the matter is, a love of learning grows out of a persistent effort where you take your active attention, you take self-control, and you persistently go to class day after day. So someone studying English literature may going into that class not caring at all about English literature, and maybe the teacher was very enthusiastic about English literature, and they drew your attention for the first day. But for the day 2, day 3, day 4, it took self-control to think that I have to stay in this class and learn about it. But while you're there, if you become in the habit of making yourself learn, even when you don't feel like it, and there are other things enticing you away, suddenly something piques your interest. And you say, I'd kind of like to learn more about that. And you study it, and you actually sit and Google it without anyone telling you to. It wasn't on the assignment sheet. No one told you you had to do that. And you think about it, and then you talk about it with someone. And so now you've moved into this passive secondary attention. And that at this point, you wouldn't really even need a teacher. But to get to that level, even being able to Google, even be able to read or type or do any kinds of language arts whatsoever, or be in college in the first place, you had to have self-control. You had to actively make yourself pay attention. If this law wasn't true, there wouldn't even be a need for teachers. And there's going to be a day, it says in Isaiah, that we will not have need of anyone to teach us. That might be Jeremiah, where it says, though, that there's coming a day where Torah will be written on our heart and no one will need to teach us. Our children won't need anyone to teach them, because we'll just all have this desire to be absorbed in learning what's right and learning everything. But for now, we're in reality, and we need teachers, and we need someone to instill self-control in us, and we need to learn to instill it in ourselves. Interest in learning, the love of learning, is purchased at a price, and that price is hard work, strenuous effort. That's how you learn. And when you do that, eventually you train your body to think, and suddenly it is free to think about things that might be more interesting. A good illustration that Mr. Gregory used was that if a ship is sailing out in the ocean and it needs to get to port because it has valuable treasure on board, you could leave it to the winds that were on the ocean to take it to port. And you could hope that the winds would guide it into a harbor that it was safe and not crash on the rocks. And it was the right harbor with the person that wanted to buy your treasure ready on shore standing there. You can hope all day that the wind is going to get you to that harbor, but that's probably not going to happen. The chance of that happening is, The likelihood is instead that you're going to have to put the sails up, and you're going to have to learn how to guide the ship to the correct harbor and manage the ship in the worst of wind and storm. It doesn't just drift. Things don't just happen. You have to guide them. You have to design a course and get it there. Having said that, if you as a teacher are a master slave driver, constantly cracking the whip over your children and forcing them to learn whether they could care less to learn or not, you're not likely to cause a love of learning. And in fact, you're probably going to cause a permanent dislike for that subject. So what you want is to have stages of advancement. You want to teach your children to make an effort to have a little bit of self-control. But the reward for that effort should be something fun that they actually enjoyed learning. And then you teach them how to have self-control, to have a little bit of effort. And then the reward for that is they actually enjoyed learning. And it just keeps going. You challenge them have them help their own self-control, and you instill it and you provide what is needed by you being the parent and telling them they need to sit down and open the book and grab their pencil and we're going to learn. But you also reward them by being a good teacher and giving them some fun lessons and things that are going to be rewarding to learn about. And as that cycle goes, they exercise their self-control muscles. You learn how to be a good teacher. And over time, a love of learning is instilled. I think the same idea would be a child that has taken the effort to learn to read. You can reward them with a book that is actually interesting, so that, we call them living books, books that make you want to keep turning the page. They worked really hard to learn to read. Don't give them books that are dull and boring. Give them books that are exciting. Okay. And it's also why knowledge needs to be arranged in a certain order. This is why we have a scope and sequence and why we have a curriculum, because there is a certain order to which things, if they're learned in this order, then it's easier to understand the topic. So you don't just decide one day when you wake up that you're going to study fractions. And this is one of the reasons I don't really love just loosey-goosey systems of teaching things like reading and math. Because as a parent, I don't know the best way to teach something so that it's already got all the things that they need to know. Like, you could start teaching your children algebra in first grade. I think technically you really could, but they don't have all of the skills needed. So you're going to be there for like 3 hours trying to teach them all these different pieces, and they're not going to enjoy it. So it would be better if you arranged arithmetic in a certain order, and little by little by little, you taught them, and they had to expend a little bit of effort. And yet, as the math got easier and easier, they were rewarded with things with, 100 on their test, and knowing they could do it and realizing that they were getting smarter. And so it's really nice to have an order about our learning and a system. This is why biology is put into systems and we learn them instead of going haphazardly. So, and as things are put in this order, it's also easier to link things that we already know with things that are new. So the new things are the challenge. The things we already know are easy. So we take the thing that's already easy, and we're not going to stress at all about that, and we link it to something new that might be a little bit intimidating. And if you link it well, then it wasn't hard and you feel really cool about it. That's your reward. And then the next day you can take, something that you already know and add a little bit more on. And so that's why it makes sense to teach things in a certain order. Knowledge is not a material object. Knowledge is not a physical bit of something that you pass like a baton from one person to the next. It's not like that. Knowledge is almost like it's not a material thing. The teacher has to be present. The student has to think, and they both have to put their whole body and soul and spirit into it in order for it to happen. And both of them have to be using attention. The teacher has to have attention to the subject and enthusiasm and previous knowledge. And the student has to apply self-control and a little bit of effort in order to care about it. And when that happens, then you have learning. And it reminds me of the Shema, where it says, "Hear, O Israel." We've talked in a previous session about the word Shema and how it means to pay attention, actively pay attention, and not just listen with our ears like, oh, I heard a sound, but actually do something with the information that you got. That's a lot different than just hearing something. And I think that's why Yeshua says, some people have ears to hear, like they're actually paying attention. And he was the master teacher. He could have been the master teacher all day long, but unless the student was actively engaged, it just wasn't going to happen. You'd have the best book in the world, the most amazing living books that you have on your shelf, and your children never crack them because there's no interest and no self-control, or no one motivating them or requiring them to open it. So to start with interest, some things to keep in mind, try to use the 5 senses. Use not just your eyes, but listen, smell, touch, taste, if possible. That'd be pretty cool. You won't be able to do that with every lesson, but see how many of the 5 senses you can get involved. As a teacher, use your face, your voice, your hands, your gesture, only as needed. You can get carried away with this, but as I'm looking out at my kids and they're sitting around the table, we're talking about something, and I can see their eyes glazing over and they're just starting to daydream and not even think about what I'm talking about. I can use a hand motion or change my voice. Maybe I was talking like this and I can start talking in a whisper. And I can promise you that just changing something like that can grab their eyes back. So I pay attention a lot to the eyes of the students that I'm looking at. The eyes tell me if they're paying attention or not. You look at that sometime, trying to see if you can notice someone who's daydreaming and do something to get their eyes to turn to you. And then think how you could use that in a teaching situation. It's hard here on video because I can't see your eyes. I have no idea if what I'm talking about right now, if you're daydreaming, you could be, having YouTube going and totally check me out. So when I have to do lots of things to try to grab your attention, but in a classroom environment, I can look you in the eye and see that your eyes look right back at me, and it helps me evaluate. And again, like I said earlier, relate experiences that you've had in the past to what I'm talking about. If I can, anything to tie in what I'm talking about to you as a student, it would be easier. And this is so much easier as a mom with my own children than it is anywhere else, because we share same experiences already. I'm the mom. We live in the same house. We like this, we eat the same foods, whether we like them or not. We've been on the same family vacations. We've watched the same movies. We have the same jokes. We play the same board games. We've read the same bedtime books. So we have a lot of shared experiences already. And that's one of the reasons why homeschooling is easier than a public school, because that teacher has to get to know the students and find out a little bit about their life before she can start to tie things in. So you'll see a teacher get up in front of a group of people and say, how many here have ever been sailing? And then they wait for someone to raise their hand. That's so that they can find out that you have an experience, and now we can share that experience and we can use it as an illustration for what we want to teach. But in a home, you can skip right over all that craziness and get right to teaching and just tell stories that you know that they understand because you share those experiences. The teacher's delight in the subject obviously increases interest. You need to pay attention to the age of the student. Sometimes a 6-year-old will act interested just because they love you. You're their mom. And a 16-year-old might not do that quite as easily. So this might be different. And if you have a wide age range of children, I had 6 at a time at the most. So that was going from 12th grade all the way down to kindergarten, plus a 7th, a preschooler there. So that's very difficult to get that passion and interest to be developed in all those ages at the same time. That give yourself some leeway there, that your class is a little difficult and harder as a homeschool mom in some ways from that. And finally, make the lessons little and often. A short lesson that you repeat in a different way. Instead of telling 5 stories, repeat it again tomorrow, and repeat it again the day after that, and repeat it again the day after that. And because it's easier to keep your attention span for a short time and hear it again tomorrow than it is to have to use the self-control to sit for as long as like these conference sessions are. It's a lot harder. Thankfully, you can pause and take a bathroom break, but your kids, you might not want them to do that, and then they'll have a distraction. Don't forget the power of prayer. I have seen this happen when you have tried every human effort to grab your students' attention and get their interest in a subject, and then nothing else is working. And it is important that you get their attention. Do not forget to pray. Asking the Ruach to open their eyes, to open their ears, is an incredibly powerful thing that we tend to depend on our own strength and forget that we can do that. Some of the hindrances to attention and to learning would be apathy. I just could care less, Mom. Why do I have to do this? And that might be a character issue that you need to address before you even bother teaching lessons. It could be that they're just tired, or having a growth spurt, or catching a cold, or hungry. How many kids are hungry all the time as they're growing? It's going to be really difficult to catch your attention at those times, and you might need to keep the lessons especially short and give them more snacks, okay? Or let them have a break. Be creative, and maybe you'll still be able to teach the same information. But the biggest hindrance to interest and attention would be distractions. This is one reason why it's important not to have a cluttered house, because the more distractions there are, the harder it is to pay attention. And that goes for if you have 6 kids that you're teaching all at the same time and you're doing 6 different activities and you're trying to get all of them to pay attention, it's not likely going to happen. It's easier to do together school and keep everybody together so that they aren't as easily distracted. But as you're standing in front of kids and you're noticing that distractions might be an issue that day and there's not much you can do about it, don't start until you have their eyes. When you have their eyes, you also have their ears. So as most elementary teachers would do, they would stand in front of the class and pause. And that silence catches the attention and everyone's eyes turn to the teacher. And now she knows she has their ears. You have the eyes, you have the ears. Again, while you're talking, if you've lost them, pause. That silence catches them and they will look at you and then you can start in again. Don't wear your students out. Stop when you can look at their eyes and see the fatigue is there. They're drooping. Here's the body language. That's a good time to stop, wrap it up, come back to it next time. There's always going to be a next time. And then adapt the lessons to the ages of your students. Have variety in the presentations. Don't always do the same thing every single day, but don't be so crazy either and change it so much that just the change itself is a distraction. Tell stories. Stories help with understanding. They provide the chance for them to see your enthusiasm. They give you shared experiences. They give them mental pictures so that they are like they're watching a movie in their mind. As you tell a story, they are picturing it like it's on a TV screen, and they are able to do something with that information because of their past experiences, or they would never be able to picture it. Ask them questions to get them thinking. Didn't Yeshua do this all the time? How many times did what he say was a question compared to a statement? It's a crazy study. You should try and look it up sometime, but questions help people think. Don't always give the information, ask a question. And as we've said before, use your eyes and hands to keep their eyes and ears on you. Third law, and this is the last one we're going to do today or in this session, is the law of the language. We touched on this a little bit last night when we talked about the 3 R's. But everything that needs to be learned in life, all bits of knowledge have vocabulary attached. So I was talking about the first people back in Adam and Eve's time, maybe it was Adam and Eve, who were studying out medicinal herbs. And someone goofed and ate one that was, maybe they ate hemlock and died. Although I guess that's not a good medicinal herb. But the very fact that you're studying medicinal herbs, I've got some vocabulary right there. I know what an herb is. I know what medicine is. I know what poison is. That's vocabulary. And I have to be able to speak the language in order to understand the topic. And so language is the third key. You have to have the teacher. You have to have the learner, but you have to speak the same language. Those two can't be talking Greek to each other, or you're not going to be able to understand. It's got to be common. Language is not just words. It's just a system of signs and symbols. And, most of the time, I guess it is words, but even when those words are more like pictures that they represent. So I guess you could say it's visual. Language is the basis of our world. It's the basis of why we understand scripture. I mean, doesn't it say in Romans, faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word of God? Language is how we understand anything, not just scripture. A lot of people think language is artificial, that language is invented at some point in history after the hunter-gatherers were grunting and groaning at each other. Someone invented language and now everything's beautiful. But that's not what the word of God tells us. It says that the very first thing in all of the universe was language. John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Like, no human being invented this. This is his idea. He knows you as his teacher and he knows your students. And without language, you're not going to be able to communicate with him because that's how he made you. And that's how he made your kids. So you have to understand the vocabulary of your students more than they need to understand yours. This is a concept that takes some little bit of thinking to wrap your head around. You got to know the vocabulary of that 5-year-old, or else teach them the vocabulary, or you can't talk their language. It's no different than if you went over to visit France and you went into a shop to purchase some croissants, and they were yummy and they smelled so good. It was early in the morning and they were fresh out of the oven, but you have no idea how to tell them that you want that croissant and you don't know what it costs. So how are you going to pay for it? So you start grunting and groaning like a caveman, I guess. And so that grunting and groaning and gesturing with your hands becomes the language that you're using. The only way that you could talk a little bit more efficiently is if the French person stopped their baking and turned around and told you how to count and told you what money meant in their country and told you how to say the croissant. And then maybe then you could use actual words. So beware as you're teaching your kids that the vocabulary coming out of your mouth matches the vocabulary that they know. If you're using words that they don't understand, they're not going to learn your subject. In fact, a lot of times, if you've ever been in a situation when you heard a teacher teaching and they said a word you didn't know, and how many times does that just lead you off on a bunny trail? You're like, I wonder what that word means. Or you're reading a book. I love being on a Kindle device for this purpose. If you come across a word you don't know what it means, you can hold your finger on it and it pops up a dictionary meaning. But by now, you've totally lost the flow of what you were reading. You're distracted. So not having the same vocabulary causes a distraction, which ruins interest and attention. So you need to think about that 5-year-old in front of you. It's easier when it's your child. You know what words they know and what words they don't know, but sometimes you still are not thoughtful. And you need to think about speaking their language. And if you really want to use that difficult word, you can say the difficult word and then repeat the next thing out of your mouth is a synonym that they would understand, which by that point, you might as well just use that, unless you're trying to teach them the vocabulary. So beware, words can have more than one meaning. You may think that your student understands it, but they may think a different meaning. And a funny example that Mr. Gregory uses is the wicked flee when no man pursueth. That's a verse in Proverbs 28. And I'm thinking the wicked flee, the wicked run away when no one's pursuing. See how I did that? Let's pretend we didn't know what the word flee meant. The wicked flee, the wicked run away when no man pursueth. And that's how I would do it if I were talking to a 5-year-old. Meanwhile, in the mind of your 5-year-old, they're thinking a wicked flea. My dog has fleas. The wicked flea? And so they're totally not understanding what you're talking about. So you need to make sure. How about this one? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I'm not allowed to want ice cream. That's not what that word means. It means Yehovah is, and there I defined the word, Yehovah is my shepherd, I shall not be in lack. I shall not be missing anything. I won't be in need of something. So it's very different depending on what the words mean. You've got to know all this stuff. This is more important than knowing math. This is more important than knowing, how to use good grammar. It's more important that you know the vocabulary of your student. You know your child. What's their vocabulary? Try to use it. And yes, you can gradually increase it by saying the wicked flee or the wicked run away. But meanwhile, I use run away. It doesn't matter what the teacher says, but what the student hears. Remember what Yeshua said, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. They're the only ones that can learn. If they don't have ears to hear and they don't understand what you're saying, they're not going to understand. So think more about the needs of the learner than your own needs. That's basically this law. Now, thinking about language, the flip side of that is learning is complete when the student can express what has been learned in his own words. Talking is thinking. So when I tell my child, I want you to go out to the car and I want you to go into the glove compartment and I want you to get the receipt from Walmart for me and I want you to come back in. And their child goes out to the car and they're like, where did they say it was? So they, instead of, they get into the trunk and they open the trunk and they're looking everywhere and they're like, I don't see the Walmart bag. So they've missed me completely. I said, get into the glove compartment and get a receipt. And they said, open the trunk. Or that's what they heard. So one of the ways I can check that the child actually understood what I said is just have them repeat it back to me. So child, I want you to go out to the car and get into the glove compartment and get the Walmart receipt. What did I say? Okay, Mom, you want me to go out to the car and you get in the trunk? No, not the trunk. So start over. Oh, you want me to get in the glove compartment? So you will know if your child has learned something if they can express it back in language, in words, because this is the law of language. Language is how we know if someone's learned something. They have to be able to state what they're going to learn before they can learn it. So it's really helpful when you get up in front of your students in the morning and you say, today we're going to learn about fractions. We're going to learn how to cut something in half. Now, they might not even know what that means. So you might have to show a story showing how to cut something in half. And then you're going to say, kids, you understand what we're going to learn today. Yeah, we're going to learn how to cut it in half, but Mom, we don't even know how. Well, don't worry about that. I just want you to know that this is what we're going to talk about today. See if they can state the problem. And then that was a really simplistic example. There's a really cool poem that was in Mr. Gregory's book. It says, thoughts disentangle, passing o'er the lip. So as thoughts are in our head and they're rumbling all around and we have to put them into words, suddenly they make sense. And that's how we can know that our kids are understanding. This is why the Torah says we discuss things with them all day long, because that's how we know that they're learning. Now, it doesn't say preach at them all day long. It says have a back and forth. You talk to them, they talk to you. And when they talk to you, you know that what's in their heart is making sense. One child said to his teacher, I know more than I can say. Another way of saying that was, I don't know how to put that into words. I've felt that way many times. And that just means that I need to think about it some more because I don't really have a good grasp on it. And if your child can't put what you've been teaching them back into words, then they don't know it. In math, because I keep using math as an example, a great way to do this and see if they understand the concept would be to have them go to the whiteboard and teach you how to solve a problem. And you might do this after they've had a chance to practice a little bit, but have them teach somebody else and you watch and observe that they're able to put it into words and you'll know if they learn it. It is difficult, remember, to get enough mastery of the language to express what we're doing in words. So if they can't do it in words, let them use some other way, maybe draw a picture, show you with, and you watch. Sometimes that's necessary, but then try to work with them to eventually get it into the highest form of language, and that's words. Language is the storehouse of all knowledge. How we measure and test what someone knows is through language. Let me show you an example of how language is the storehouse of all knowledge. Thinking about words contain all of the knowledge in the world. Here's an example. If I ask you what the word act means, or just think about it, what does it mean to act? Okay. To act is to do, to move, to put something into, I can hardly do it without using the word act in a different way. Let me show you some of the other ways the word act is. He acted, acting, actor, actress, action, actionable, active, actively, actual, actually, actualize, actuality. So knowing the three-letter word act then brings me a storehouse of knowledge that can help me understand so many other things. So this is why we learn language with our children, because it is the container, the framework and structure, you could say, for all learning. You have the teacher, you have the learner, and you need the language. Words are not the only language, of course, as we mentioned before. Body language is kind of language. You can tell if your children have learned something or not by their body language, or if they even have the desire to learn by their body language. Pictures, as I mentioned, they can contain information. Going outside and looking at God's creation can teach us so much. It speaks to us. Don't the stars speak to us? Can we not look at a tree, at a massive tree? I'm looking at one out my window right now and know that there's a creator, because only he could design something that amazing. So creation speaks. And in that way, so do parables and stories about his creation. And that's what Yeshua did. He said, a man went out to sow or to plant his field. See, I just defined a word. Oh, and in all of that learning, we need to give some time for silence because our heads can get full. The absence of language is silence. And that means any kind of language, whether it's music or just the ability to sit in a black room with no light, no anything, just sleep. The absence of language gives us a chance to rest. The absence of bad body language gives us peace in the home. When you're teaching to your children, try to use the simplest, fewest words possible. Use short sentences, use small words. You can teach them vocabulary. Absolutely, you must, so that they can understand others. But for you, you are trying to convey a thought. Make sure that language is simple. Keep simple sentence construction. And if you come across a word that they don't know, or you're concerned that they don't know, repeat it in another language or in simpler terms. For instance, when we come into Sabbath and knowing about Torah, we might say to someone, Shabbat Shalom. Well, we found someone recently who didn't know what that meant. They had never heard that word before, and they were in our congregation. And we have to repeat Shabbat. That means Sabbath, or maybe they don't know what that means. It means Saturday, or it means a day of rest. And shalom means, that means peace. So you could say, Shabbat Shalom, have a peaceful day of rest, or have a quiet, restful Saturday. Does that make sense? And in all this talking, encourage your students to talk freely back at you. Learn things slowly so that you have time to get the language down before you bother with trying to speed through a textbook. Go slow enough that you have a chance to really understand the language. And when you're testing somebody, if you must test, the most important thing you have to test is their understanding of the vocabulary that you have learned, which is why in our science curriculum, we spend a lot of time talking about vocabulary. If your student understands the vocabulary, they will understand the concept, and you should spend a lot of time every week trying to think of as many ways as possible to understand that word with experiences and stories from their life that they will understand. So don't rush through that. If it takes 2 weeks to get through a science lesson, do it. And make sure you really have a good grasp of the vocabulary. And then throughout the rest of the year, that's what you review. You won't need to review all the experiments and all the stories that you use to build the vocabulary. You can just review the vocabulary, and you will know that their storehouse of knowledge is full. When you're talking to your children, don't assume that because they look interested, they understand the vocabulary, the words that you're using. Just looking interested does not mean that they understand that word. They might have just been overwhelmed by the number of words that came out of your mouth, and they are just trying to look interested, Mom, because they love you. They might love the teacher. They might actually want to talk about science today. So they are really excited because you said something about they're going to do an experiment, and they think that's fun. And they're really excited, but they have no idea what you're talking about. And sometimes, entertainment and fun is the only thing keeping them smiling, and you think that they got it and they have no clue what you just said. So when there's no understanding, check the language first, check the vocabulary, go back to that, and make sure that they really have a good grasp on it. Hunt for the problem until you find the word that they didn't understand. Say it again in a different way with a different story, a different illustration until there is understanding. And best of all, increase your own vocabulary, Mom and Dad, because as you increase it, you come up with more stories and ways that you could explain something, even if you never use that big word. I love having the app on my phone that gives me a word of the day. It's dictionary.com. And I don't intend to use most of those words, just out of curiosity. Today's word is Fletcherize, to chew your food slowly and thoroughly. Let's Fletcherize our dinner tonight. I'm probably not going to use that. I'm probably not even going to remember it, but it does make me wonder why it's called Fletcherize. And so my curious mind would probably click on that and then maybe Google a thing or two to find out why it was ever called that. And then I might think about why would we chew our food slowly and thoroughly, and what would be the benefits, and all of that discovery of that word just increased my learning, increased my knowledge. So those are the first 3 tips on how to teach. And I'm sure your brain is full. My brain's tired of communicating. So we're going to come back and we're going to tackle part 2 of how to teach. Shalom. Shalom and welcome to the 2021 Homeschool Family Conference, and this is the third day of the conference. We're going to be continuing what we started this morning. We're going to be talking about how to teach. This is How to Teach Part 2, and my name is Ann Elliott, and I'm the creator and founder of HomeschoolingTorah.com. In Part 1, which we did this morning, and you'll definitely want to see that one first if you haven't had a chance, we learned 3 laws of the teacher, is what we called it. It comes from an 1800s book by John Milton Gregory, and Mr. Gregory did a great job of expressing so many laws, he called them, of teaching, just things like the law of gravity. This will happen, so you need to be aware of it if you're going to do a good job of teaching. We learned that the teacher must have knowledge if she's going to teach something. The student must pay attention if he's going to learn something. And you must be speaking the same language as each other if you're going to be able to communicate with each other. So today we're going to do 4 laws. We have the law of the lesson, the law of the teaching process, the law of the learning process, and the law of review. So we're going to jump right in. The law of the lesson. The truth that you're wanting to convey must be learned by going through something that has already been learned. Okay, you have to connect what is new to what is old. You can't start from nothing. And I think of that old Sound of Music song, and it has the phrase in it, nothing comes from nothing. I don't even know if I did that on tune. Anyway, that you have to have something there. We aren't Yehovah, the creator of the universe, who can make something come out of nothing. We can't make our students learn something if we don't have a connection there to something that they already know. So your job as a teacher is to find the point that you share some knowledge and connect that dot. Okay. That's not always as easy as it sounds. In fact, of all the lessons and laws that we're going to talk about today, I think this one can be the most difficult to remember on a day-to-day basis, that I have to explain something to somebody using something that is already in their head and connect what I'm trying to say to that piece. I can't connect it to something that's in my head. That won't do my student any good. Just because I know lots and lots of stuff about baking bread, if the person I'm talking to doesn't, then I can talk all day, but they're not going to understand. I have to put myself in the shoes of my student. This would be another way of saying this law. Now, we always have to go forward. We can't be constantly trying to go back into the past and finding out what the student knows. We want to always go forward every day, learn something new, but connect it to the old. And the next day, learn a little something new, but connect it to the old. Not on a treadmill where we're being boring and repeating the same thing. There's nothing worse as getting up in front of it, having a teacher get up in front of us and say the same thing they said the day before. It's like, snore. We don't want that. We have to always give them something new, but we have to also be cautious not to give something so new that they have no idea what we're talking about. And you can totally see it in the eyes of the students when you do this. They're like, what? I don't get this. I think it happens in math a lot. You can definitely see this. The teacher knows how to do it. So they explain it and the student's just not getting it. Usually that's because we're not connecting it to something that they already know. And when we teach something new, we do have to master those facts before we go on. And then so it's like everything has to be connected. That's the key. We have to have a systematic way in which we teach something, and we have to systematically get the knowledge inside our head over into our students. And we have to be really systematic about being systematic, connecting everything. I want you to think about one definition of knowledge. To know something is to be able to compare it to something else and judge whether it's true or not, which goes into what I was just saying. If you really know something, it's because you connected it to something else that you knew, and you could tell that it was true or false. So if I say that this marker is orange. Well, you can't really see it in the light. If I say that this marker, this highlighter is orange, you're going to go, no, it's not, because you already know from your preschool days, all your colors, and you've connected that to former knowledge. And you know, this is not orange, this is yellow. I know that's a very simplistic thing, but that's called discernment. And the only way we can discern something is if we know previous knowledge and then we compare it to what we just heard. So knowledge is the process of comparing and judging something new to what has already been learned. One way that we do this all the time is when we tell stories. When you listen to a friend tell a story about her dog, and she talks about how her dog did some funny trick, you immediately bring up stories in your past where you saw dogs do funny tricks. And so as friends, then you tell your story. And then your friend, while you're telling your story, connects that story to something that she knows, and she tells another story. And then you connect that story to a story you already know. And that's why friends can talk for hours and hours and hours and never stop, because they are connecting common experiences. And the whole time you're talking, you're learning new things, because as your friend speaks, there are new things that she's saying that connect to what you didn't know. And so, the benefit of having a discussion is that you can compare and contrast what you do know and what you don't know, and you can go back and forth and back and forth, and it's pretty cool. So when I say that a teacher needs to explain something to her students, the way you explain is take something familiar and compare it to the thing that is new. When you compare back and forth and take the familiar thing and usually tell a story to compare it to the new, then your student will understand. So when you're teaching an unfamiliar concept in math and you want to compare it to something, you can often go into the kitchen or into the tool shop or the garage. Think about the grocery store, and you compare it to things that are in those places, and your student knows those things. So suddenly math makes sense. Now, here is what it is not. When you're trying to explain something to a new person, just speaking in a loud, clear voice with careful enunciation is not explaining. Here's an example. If I were to travel to Israel and a native Hebrew speaker who does not know English comes up to me and asks me a question, and I, who don't know enough Hebrew to have a good conversation with that person, speak back at them in English, just because the person, okay, let's say I need to know where the bathroom is. And I don't know how to say it in Hebrew. So I say, excuse me, can you show me where the bathroom is? And the person rattles back something in Hebrew. And I say, no, excuse me, do you know where the bathroom is? That's not going to help. They don't know that word. You could talk as slow and careful and enunciate as much as you want to, but there's no common knowledge there. So you're never going to find the bathroom. What you have to do is find a translator who can connect all the dots. So when your child doesn't understand a concept in math, talking more slowly and saying, I said, what is 2 + 2? That's not going to help. Talking slower does not help. You've got to connect the dots. There's a missing piece of information there. So don't talk slower. That's just going to frustrate everyone. Here's another thing that explaining is not. Explaining is not speaking with urgency. I said, what's 2 + 2? We talked about it yesterday. Don't you know? I mean, just being urgent is still not connecting the dots. You can't bring something up out of nothing. You just can't do it. Repeating myself exactly in the same way is not going to help. So you have a story problem and your child is saying, 2 girls went to the store. The first one bought a dress for $9.99. The second girl got her dress for 30% cheaper. The child says, I don't know how to solve this. Okay, let's read the problem again. The girl went to the store, and you just start in and read the exact same problem again. You're probably going to get the same response from your student. I don't know what to do. You have to connect. You have to reword it in a new way and share some common experience that helps the child know that maybe they have been in that situation before. You can say, it was like last week when you wanted to buy that thing, and help them understand that this is the same situation. I think that when we do some of these mistakes in explaining, what we actually do is exasperate our child. And this comes from Ephesians 6, where it says, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath. Like we aren't always doing it in an angry way. Sometimes we just can't connect the dots, and we think that by speaking slower or louder or more urgently or repeating ourselves over and over again will help them understand when actually they just don't understand. And you have to connect with stories and discussions and think about their past and where they've been and how you could draw in a common experience to help them understand. So, and I want to caution you, you can't go into your own experiences. That won't help. Your student wasn't there in 1992. They won't know that story. You have to come up with a common experience from their life. So you can share experiences, and this is just one of the most wonderful benefits of homeschooling compared to teaching in a classroom where 30 students coming from 30 different homes, or in a church situation where you only see them for an hour a week at Sunday school. When you have someone at home and they are your child, you share a lot of experiences. So you can very quickly come up with something. And you know what, sometimes this is where we get frustrated with our children. We're like, I know you know what I told you to do with your socks because I told you. And maybe our child didn't actually hear us. And so we all get frustrated with each other. But truly, in a home situation, you share more experiences. So if you'll just be patient with each other and come up with some of those shared experiences, your child will learn a lot faster. So the goal of all learning is to make knowledge that is new as familiar as like household things like what the color yellow is or what all your colors are. You want to make the math concepts that you're learning as familiar as how to tell your colors. Does that make sense? So that's the goal of learning, so that all of your experiences will be shared and simple and easy to get to. Basically, learning is problem solving. I'm going to show you the steps of problem solving because I want you to think about the fact that when your child is learning something new, they have a big giant question mark at the beginning of their mind of the lesson. And you have to get it to, okay, that's a shared experience. So for instance, when you're learning fractions for the very first time, your student is going, I think ratios, let's say ratios. Ratios isn't something we use every day in everyday life. Maybe some people do. In your home, you might, but in our home, we don't really. So when you come up to a ratio, you have to come up with a common experience. And so for the student, this is going to be problem solving. I have no idea what a ratio is. That's the first step of problem solving, to ask a question. I don't know what this is, or I'm not sure how that works, or who is Queen Elizabeth II? You know, parent probably knows, but the question's like, or the students, I have no idea who that is. Or we'll say, you know, back when Ronald Reagan was president, and the student who wasn't alive then is going, who's Ronald Reagan? So the first step of problem solving is to ask a question. And you can say with your children, do you know who Ronald Reagan is? And you can find out. And if they say no, or you can see from the blank expression, then now you have an opportunity to teach them something. And because the first step is to ask a question. So when you don't know something yourself, think about the fact that the first thing you do is go, I don't know that. You know, as adults around the table, sometimes when we're at dinner, we'll say, you know, does anyone know the answer to this? And then I'll pick up our phones and go, hey, Google. And Google answers. It's because we ask a question and we are on the process of solving a problem. The second thing is to organize ourselves. So first, ask a question. Second, organize ourselves. The very fact is that I need to know what tools I have available so that I can figure out how to solve the problem. So for me, I knew that I had Google available, so I could ask, hey, Google, and she can answer. But that's probably not the best of tools. Dictionaries, encyclopedias, concordances, using Wikipedia would be a simple tool. But of course, learning how to do advanced searches online, that's much better. Finding out who else knows this subject well, and we could ask questions of that person. What books do I have on my shelf? What library resources are available? Do I have time to go to the library today? So is time available? These are all tools that are available. And so before we can get very far in learning, we have to ask a question, then figure out what are our resources and organize all of those things together. So when you're doing history, you're going to use a different set of tools than you would when you're doing how to type. You know, that would be an entirely different set of resources. Or learning wood carving would be very different from learning to bake a cake. So you organize yourself, you get all of it together, and then you start to ask questions of all of those resources. And the final step would be to solve your dilemma by evaluating which one of the answers you get back is actually useful. not all solutions that you get back are useful. That's really easy to understand if you look up a word in the dictionary. You go to the dictionary and you want to know what a word means, and it has 4 definitions for that word. Some of them are nouns, some of them are verbs, some of them are just entirely different, because words in the English language can sometimes mean 2 entirely different things. So when you go to that dictionary, you have to solve your own question by asking which one of these in context answers the question that I had, and reject all the other solutions. It's not that those solutions are always bad, but this is the process of discernment. So remember, I said that knowledge is comparing and judging between all these different options. Well, that's what problem solving is. There are a lot of possible answers, but only one is going to be appropriate for that situation. So we ask a question, we list and organize all of our resources and all of our tools, and then we solve it by comparing all the possible answers and rejecting the ones that don't fit. Really, what knowledge is, this is another definition that you could use. It's a collection of all the problems that have ever been solved since the time of Adam and Eve. Those things are collected into books and into libraries. They're passed down orally from teacher to student and have been for 6,000 years. And that's what knowledge is. Over time, people have compared, one plant, one weed on the side of the road to another weed, and said that one is pretty and perfectly fine, and that one is poison, even though they look very similar. The collection of that knowledge is then passed down to the next generation, but a person could, not knowing that information, might have to start over, and it would be wise for them to evaluate many answers before just munching on something that could be poison. So the process of learning something is comparing and contrasting and solving problems, but we have to start with information that is already known and go to new information. So you can see that learning something is kind of complicated. It's not as simple as just, I'm going to present the fact 2 + 2 is 4. That might be simple, but it might not be so simple when you're doing a, polynomial equation in algebra. So when you start a new lesson, don't get frustrated with your students. Kind of accept, and this is hard for homeschooling moms, accept the fact that learning takes a little bit of time. It's not, you can just sit down and assign something and go on with life. If your child is really going to learn something, you're probably going to have a discussion, and you're not going to be able to hurry up and get out of the room. You're going to have to stay there long enough to be able to not exasperate each other. I told you yesterday, I got to get back in the kitchen. That's probably not going to make for good learning. So one of the things that you really need is to have time. And when you start a lesson, whatever subject it is, encourage your students to refresh their knowledge of what they learned yesterday, so that you have more common experiences to get a good start on that day. So having a nice little review period at the beginning so that everybody can remember what their shared knowledge is can make it a lot easier. And that, whether that's math or history or Torah or whatever it is, that can really help. Help your students relate the new lessons to former lessons. Have a little bit of talk time and discussion. Allow students to tell stories from their own experiences. In our Sabbath congregation, every Sabbath, we have the children come up front for about 5 to 10 minutes of a children's lesson. And the teacher gets up and quickly teaches maybe a parable or a fruit of the spirit or whatever. And then the children all rush back to their seats. And one of the most difficult things about that is that you've got a whole pile of kids in the front of the congregation, and the teacher starts to talk. And very naturally, kids, let's say we were doing the parable of you are the light of the world. And the student or the teacher will just naturally ask a question. Kids, do you know what this flashlight is for? Well, kids do what kids are supposed to do, what he created them to do. And they all raise their hand and they all want to tell you some very long story about 2 or 3 minutes long about this flashlight that they had at their house that week. And as soon as they tell that story, then all the kids think of shared experiences when they also had flashlights and they want to tell their story. And all the adults in the congregation are like, oh my word, we're never going to get done in 10 minutes. All the kids want to talk. They should just be quiet. And that may be true in the context of a Sabbath congregation where you just have a few minutes, but really that's what kids are supposed to do. And in home situation, take and allow time for the children around your table to talk and share their experiences. Not only will it give you an idea of how you can now present the lesson in a way that they'll understand it better, but they are reviewing the old information that they have, so they're going to make better connections. It's actually the way we're supposed to be. Encourage students to explain the new concept that you've just taught to them. Ask them to explain it back to you in any way that they can. And when I say in any way that they can, they're not going to explain it as well as you could have. So you have to be patient. This is where, as a teacher, you have to develop this patience and this slow down feeling that let your kids explain it back to you. And it made, you could have your third grader explain the concept to your 5-year-old. And no, the third grader's not going to do it as eloquently as you might have done it. And the temptation will be to interrupt them and help them do it in a more adult-like fashion. But when you let them do it in their own words, they are connecting it to previous experiences and they are learning it better. If at all possible, choose story problems when you're going to work new math problems on the board before you give them their worksheet. Try to come up with problems that are from their own experiences, from something that they might have done in the past few days, or something they might have seen somebody do with their own eyes, because it will help connect. All those connections need to be formed. Make basic facts like multiplication and addition and subtraction, books of the Bible, basic facts about Torah, stories and parables of Yeshua. Make all of these things thoroughly familiar so that your child will not even have to hesitate to draw up old knowledge, and you can get a lot faster start on new knowledge. So that's why those primary years and even the early childhood time are so important, because you're laying a foundation of basic facts. Don't try to rush into middle school and high school without having down the most basic of facts. Those must be learned thoroughly. In history, to have a good understanding of the timeline before you try to bring in nuances, it really helps. So really make that your goal. By the way, though, I do want to say you can't do it all. So you might have to make a decision of what basic facts you have time to emphasize, and then really make sure that you do. This is the value of a curriculum, so that you don't have to invent the wheel. But it is also the value of actually following the curriculum. When they say to make sure you review those math facts, make sure you do. It usually is a matter of time. Parents are busy and kids don't want to have to necessarily sit there while you're antsy. And often it seems to me it's we who are antsy. So finally, keep lessons short enough that they don't lose interest, which means that you might not get much accomplished in a day. You might have a good time of review and connecting the old to the new, and then only a very short time on the new, and then a little bit of review to wrap up all those connections again. And it feels like you hardly make any progress at all. When yet, if over the span of 12, 13, 18, 20 years, you're making haste slowly, you're plodding along slowly, building a strong foundation, and ever so slightly always adding new things to it, so that by the time you have an adult, they really know what they know. You want to have your student become a discoverer, a conqueror. And every time I say these words, are you not bringing up past experiences of history class? An inventor, a conqueror of new worlds. Your student should have the attitude of a discoverer. And if you have to write that phrase down somewhere, maybe on the top of your teacher notebook, I want my students to have the attitude of discovery. But the very fact of that what discovery is means that we're sharing an experience. What a discoverer is. Who discovered America? Who discovered the first molecule? That what a discoverer is means that we're doing the same thing right here. But you want your children to always have the attitude of discovery, and it takes time. That's what I want to emphasize on that. Time and patience. All right, the fifth law. This is the law of the teaching process. And we're going to emphasize the process of learning from this perspective of the teacher for just a second. And that is that you want to emphasize that self-learning, that you should not tell your student anything that he couldn't learn himself. So there's not really here, like, I thought you were going to talk about the teacher. Well, maybe the point of the teacher sometimes is to get out of the way. Now, I'm going to say something. When I was reading this in Mr. Gregory's book, kind of made my skin crawl a little, and I just took it the wrong way. And I want to explain why I took it the wrong way. I started thinking about the fact that the Torah is our schoolmaster that leads us to Messiah, right? We have to have the Torah. You have to have the teacher being the schoolmaster if you're ever going to understand who the Messiah is. But then we also know in Romans chapter 1 that everyone in the entire world is without excuse, because even nature teaches them. They have eyeballs of their own, and they can discover who the Messiah is without anyone teaching them. And I'm like, no, we need a teacher. There's so many times that we told in the Torah we're supposed to teach. We have to have a teacher. But then there's also the grace of God, and the Ruach himself is a teacher who lives and dwells within. But I guess that is still a teacher. See, I'm going round and round on this. I'm like, why would the most important thing for a teacher to do at times is to stay out of the way and tell the student nothing that he couldn't learn for himself? Well, I hope we can wrestle some of these ideas. I didn't get it all figured out. Some of the reasons why you don't want your student to always have to depend on you as a teacher is because A, it saves time. How much time do you actually have to sit around and teach all day? You probably still do need to cook supper and make laundry. And by the way, your student's going to grow up someday and they're not going to be at home forever. So they won't always have you to be their teacher. B, maybe some students are weak and they need help. They might be weak in an area and they just cannot understand that. I'm thinking of students with special needs, or students that just never got a good understanding in reading. And so they have trouble sounding out new words and they can't comprehend difficult historical texts. So they're weak and they need a teacher to come along and explain something. And I think this is what the apostles were talking about when they said that the Torah is our schoolmaster to bring us to the Messiah. We're weak and we might have nature to teach us. And yes, we are without excuse, but not everybody can look at a flower and think of a creator. Some people think of evolution and they're just weak in that area and they need someone to come along and explain. Even the Ethiopian eunuch who is no slough. I mean, he was a really smart guy. He needed Philip to come up into the chariot with him and explain the scroll of Isaiah because he didn't understand it. So sometimes we're weak in areas. And so those are the times we need a teacher. And then other times we just have an urgent need for information. We got to get this done. So this is the time we go, hey, Google, I don't have time to have a really long discussion with my neighbor who worked for 50 years in that industry. I just need the answer right now. Sometimes this is good in spelling. Your kids are trying to write a paragraph. You ask them to write a paragraph, but they don't know how to spell the word broccoli. That's a hard one for me. So you could say, now, honey, I want you to go look up the word broccoli in the dictionary. Of course, they're writing about the value of vegetables today, and they're going to write about 10 different vegetables. And you wanted them to have it done before lunch, but you're going to then totally distract them from that task and take them over to the dictionary, teach them how to do alphabetical order, teach them how to understand word etymology. And you're so off track by that point that you can't even remember what the original paragraph was about. Sometimes it's just, there's an urgent need to learn how to spell the word broccoli. So just tell them. Just say, this is how you spell it, and forget the dictionary that day. And at that point, you might make a mental note that sometime I need to teach them dictionary skills, but for today, I'm just going to tell you how to spell it. You want your student to become a discoverer of truth, though. Ultimately, you do want them to know how to use the tools. Because remember, to learn something, you have to first ask questions. Second, learn how to use the tools and organize it all. And third, to evaluate which one is true. So to do that, you're going to have to give your student a chance to practice that. You want them to become the discoverer of truth themselves. You want them to find out the information for themselves. So they get lots of practice asking questions, looking at the tools, and evaluating which one's true. And of course, they're going to do that with your oversight at this point because they're young, they're weak. So you want to help them. You want to be the school master, but not necessarily teach them every little bit of information. Can we actually learn without a teacher? Let's think about this from a biblical perspective. Could Adam learn without a teacher? Did he learn everything without a teacher? I don't think so. I'm gonna take you over to Genesis chapter 2 real quick. Let's go to Genesis 2:15. It says, Yehovah Elohim took the man, Adam, and put him in the garden of Eden to tend it and keep it. And he commanded the man, saying, and then he gave him some commands. And then he brought him his wife, and then they named the animals together. And down in chapter 3, we learn
verse 8, it says, they heard the sound of Yehovah Elohim walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid themselves from the presence of Yehovah Elohim among the trees of the garden. So it was the habit of Yehovah to come into the garden every day and walk with them and talk with them and do things with them. So I would say, I think we could make a case that Adam didn't just learn everything by discovery. Now we know he discovered the process of when he was naming the animals, he discovered that he did not have a partner like all the animals did. So that was the process of discovery, but his schoolmaster, Yehovah, was right there guiding that lesson. So, and Yehovah gave direct commands: do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I want you to tend the garden. I want you to be fruitful and multiply. There were a lot of commands. And I kind of wonder that the entire content of the Torah, at least the basic laws of what we should and should not do to others, were probably communicated, but I can't make a case for that. Probably it was communicated which things are good for food and which things should not be eaten. I would think that there were a lot of things that were communicated, but I can't say that 100% for sure. But I do know that at least in a few things, even the very first human being was not entirely without a teacher. Now, why do we need schools? I mean, obviously he could discover a ton by himself, and he lived to be 900 and some years of age. So he had a lot of time. That was not his problem. So why do we need schools? Well, to connect what we are discovering with what has already been discovered, which we'd call truth. So let's think about Eve. She's in the garden. Adam, before she was before she was made, Adam was told, do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Eve wasn't there. No common connection. I don't know what Adam told her. I do know that when you get to chapter 3, and Hasatan asks her, what did Adam say about this? What did God say about this tree? She gave the command a little wrong. She didn't word it the same way. So whatever their shared experience was, it wasn't exact. And I don't know where Adam was. He might have been right there, but he was daydreaming about something else. But he obviously wasn't actively participating in that discussion. So Eve went on to sin. Yes, she sinned. But according to the book of 1 Timothy, she was deceived because she didn't have complete knowledge that Adam had. He did not do a good job of passing it on. She did not connect the thing in front of her with actual truth. That's why we need teachers. We need people to be consciously, intentionally passing on information accurately and truthfully so that we're not deceived like Eve. Secondly, we need schools and teachers because we don't want to waste our life. We don't want to waste time. We only have so much time, so much energy, so much money. We don't want to have people make mistakes and have consequences like dying because they didn't know truth. So to save all of that unnecessary waste and trouble and pain in life, we need teachers to help us and to pass things along from their shared experiences, which they got from the ones in front of them, which go all the way back to Adam. And thirdly, we need teachers and we need schools because while our teachers are overseeing us, we can be under their supervision and make good decisions and get a good track record of solving problems, gathering tools, and making good discerning choices about all of the solutions. And all the times that we do that right, and of course, they're guiding us, they're protecting us, they're keeping us safe, but we gain confidence. And in that very closely monitored environment where we can make mistakes safely without any terrible, deathly consequences, they can oversee, but we are learning how to do it well, and we get confidence. Over and over again, we do things successfully and someone's going, good job. And that confidence just increases and increases until the day comes that we have to do it by ourselves. We're not afraid. A lot of times fear comes because we don't know what to expect and we feel alone. And that's not what we want for our students. We want to give them that confidence, but we don't have to do it all for them. You know, when your child is struggling with math, you don't pick up the pencil and solve it. There, I did it. Now you know how to do it. That's not what I mean. Instead, you need to sit with them, help them realize that they have a problem, what tools are available to help them solve that math problem, come up with a solution, and then help them to discern if the solution makes sense. In math, we would call that check the problem and make sure that does it actually make sense in the real world. And then they go, yeah, I did it, Mom. I did it. You were there the whole time. But you let them do it on their own with your oversight. And now they have some confidence. And now you might try it with another problem. And then you might walk away to the kitchen, but you're with an ear sight and kind of peek to see if they're getting the third problem right. And when you see that they are, their confidence levels are increasing and you have done a good job of teaching. So what motivates children to learn? Young children, I think, are motivated often by bright colors and action and animal stories and stories of other kids just like them. Everything is very concrete. They can touch it and they can feel it. But as your kids get older, and you're going to see this as you come up towards puberty and even before, the older a person is, the more they are motivated by their thoughts and by the way that makes them feel. And they reflect and they think about things and they compare and they start to live more here than by all the outward external actions. So that's how children grow. So when we are learning, we need to keep in mind the age of our students and not try to expect our little tiny children to think like an adult and not expect our teenagers to have to do everything with bright colors and animal stories, because they're past that. Teaching our children is a little bit like planting seeds, and they're going to go through levels and stages of maturity, and it takes a lot of time, like we're talking 20 years, and we have to protect them. The job of the gardener is to watch for the storms that are coming and shoo the birds away and keep poison away from our plants, and don't let the sun come down too hard on them. Make sure that we feed and water them, but we have to do it for the entire growing season. And if we let up down our guard for just one day, the foxes come in and ruin the vine. When Yeshua talks in Matthew 13 about the parable of the sower going out to seed, and he has 4 kinds of seed, he talks about seeds that are planted on the wayside and they're devoured by birds. And he clearly says in verse 18 of Matthew 13 that those listeners did not understand, so they couldn't learn. And so the very first step is making sure your children actually understand it all. But that's not the end of learning. The second place he flung his seed was on stony ground, and it sprang up quickly because they understood, but it was scorched by the sun. And it's like a child who's like, I get it. And then we let them loose to never check to see if the information really took deep hold. And when it gets difficult, they give up. This, again, I can think of math. Like the child's like, I understand how to do it, Mom. Don't keep bugging me about it. I get it. And so we let them go. And of course, predictably, later down on the math sheet, the problems get much harder and they have multiple steps involved. And the child's like, this is too hard, throws their pencil down. So they needed the teacher to stay longer and to guard them against the sun and the hot part of the day, and to still be with them and fan them off a little and offer them a drink and encourage them to keep going when the going gets hard. Students should not only work because you told them to do it. I told you to do it, so therefore you have to encourage them. You have to be with them and cheer them on. And you're the same way. You don't always do things just because of self-control. Sometimes you need someone to keep you motivated, and so you don't get overwhelmed. Students can borrow some of the love of learning from you until they have grown up as plants and can have their own love of learning. So give it. Be sure to give some of your love and encouragement and excitement to them. Keep them going, especially on difficult things, just like the stony ground that's getting scorched. Thirdly, he threw out, and there were thorns that choked the seed. He says clearly in Matthew 13 that these are worries and riches, which I would call distractions. So if you want your child to learn and they understand the math problem and they've gotten through the difficult part, so you decide to flip the TV on, and now the distraction is there, how are they going to really learn? So don't allow distractions to come in. And again, this would come into allowing enough time to complete the lesson so that you don't have to do every subject in the car as you're riding around it every day. Distractions can really ruin education. I know that's been a difficult one for us, health problems, having a new baby be born, company coming to visit. We were just learning something and now it's time for the feast and we're going to put it away for a couple of weeks. And that can really hinder learning because constant distractions come in and you don't have enough time to actually get a lesson done. The fourth ground that he threw the seed on was good ground. And this is ground that has been cultivated and composted and everything. The rich nutrients are there. And the farmer has gotten rid of the birds. They have sheltered the plants from the sun and given them plenty of encouragement and water. They have kept the thorns from choking, so no distractions were allowed in. And the result was it yielded 100-fold, 60-fold, and 30-fold in the parable. That means the child heard, they understood, they all the weeds and distractions were gone, and they were able to bear fruit. So as a parent, think about the long-term commitment that you are making to homeschooling, that and you can't always prevent everything. And maybe if your children don't understand something, you don't blame them and say, well, we covered that in third grade math. Well, maybe you had distractions going on in third grade math and you better start over. It's not always the student's fault. So that's why we're calling this the law of the teaching process. The responsibility of the teacher in helping the child learn everything for himself that he could learn for himself means that you are there to shelter and be the gardener, to make sure that the ground is good and protected. The more knowledge your student has, the more understanding will come. So as the plant gets stronger and bigger, the more likely good fruit is going to come from it. Think about how you study the Bible. When you were young, you may have read the Bible here or there. You may have heard it at church, but that day came that you understood Torah, and that desire to read it over and over and over again brought so much understanding. So the more knowledge you have, the more understanding of what the Bible says that you have, the more everything else makes sense. And it continues like that. People who are older in the faith that have read their Bible every year for 30 years have read through the Torah so many times that they can't even count how many times it has. Of course, they have more understanding than someone that's going through it for the first time. Knowledge grows by being fostered like that, by going over it again and again. And as you go over things again and again, as we do Torah year after year, we hear it read every Sabbath. As you go over the same multiplication tables in fifth grade that you were doing, the foundation for back in first grade, as you go over that information over and over again, you can inspire your children to keep wanting to learn by pointing out the value of it. Because as your child gets older and they're not inspired just by pretty colors and animal stories, you can inspire them to learn by going, you know what, someday you're going to have a job and this is going to really help you. And you can tell a story. And now you can give them one of your experiences and they're going to think about that as they do their math. And they're going to go, oh, cool, maybe I could do that. Or, oh, I could make some money doing that. And it helps them. So foster that learning, but keep repeating it over and over again. Tell them why they're doing it. How many people have said, I don't know why we learn algebra? You've got to tell them why. Why are you learning grammar? Tell them why. Connect your emotions. As you get on your soapbox at home, which, your kids will probably tease you for because you do it often. But your passion and excitement for something, your emotions that are coming out, or as you read a story together and you cry over, a sentimental part of the chapter book, all of your emotion inspires them to love learning as well. So join with your students when they're discovering things in science, when they're doing math together, do it with them. Join together and let some passion and excitement come out of you for it. Don't just let them go be discoverers, go discover with them. When you ask questions, don't be in a rush to get back to something more important than homeschooling. When you ask a question, give them time to think. Don't try to finish the sentence for them. Let them put it in their own words and let them have a chance to ask you questions because as we talked about in the first session, students show their mental activity by putting things into language and asking questions, by putting things into words. So you've got to give them time to do that. When they ask you a question, you can inspire that by asking them a question right back and getting them to think. Some of the questions that you can ask if you're not sure what to ask, and maybe the curriculum cannot provide all of this for you because it can't be there in your room with your shared experiences, okay? Curriculum can't do that. But you might be drawing a blank. What kind of question would I ask them? So in our writing curriculum, we talked about the 6 serving men: who, what, when, where, why, and how. So if you need to get a question going and get some learning going in your home, you can ask them, well, who did that? Do you know where that was? Well, what did they do? Oh, how? Why? So, and it can get that's an easy way to ask questions. Again, don't hurry. Now, before we go on, I want to just, so we have another law to cover. I want to talk about one little side note, and that is children who, instead of asking questions and answering questions and having good discussion, these are children that argue. They think they are wise. It's called wise in their own eyes. And I think you're going to know the difference. There's a child who wants to learn and they ask questions, or they tell you what they learned yesterday. And then there's the child that's just a know-it-all. And they're going to tell you, Mom, that at their big second grade maturity of wisdom, they know so much more than you. And that you need to watch out for. Do not allow your child to argue with you. Now, if they're asking a sincere question, that's fine. But you need to discern the difference between asking sincere questions and being an arrogant arguer. Philippians 2:14 says, do everything without complaining or arguing. That would be another very good verse to put on your homeschool wall. Okay, let's go into law number 6. This is the law of the learning process. So we're going to look at the process of learning from their perspective now. And this is a lot like my seeds. The student must reproduce truth that is to be learned. They have to be able to reproduce it. Now, let me tell you what I mean. Reproducing truth. That means that they can tell you what they learned. And that's how you know that they've learned. This is a little bit like the law of the language that we talked about earlier in our first session. But reproducing information and knowledge is not listing off all the things you memorized. Okay. Just because your child can word for word tell you everything that happened in history from the year 600 AD to the year 700 AD does not mean that they've learned it all. It just means that they can list off facts. Just because they can list off the books of the Bible doesn't mean they know what is in each book of the Bible. Just because they can list off 500 memory verses does not mean they know how to act from applying scripture to their life. So memorization and repetition of facts those are both important. We're going to talk about how in a second, but they are not the end all. That's not the goal of learning. Okay. Rather, you want your child to learn how to investigate so that they can learn new things later on their own. Okay. So for instance, if a child can say what he has learned in his own words with true understanding, now that's learning. So for instance, if you have your child recite John 3:16, word for word, perfectly good, that's fine, especially for a young child or a new person learning. But if they can explain to you in their own words what John 3:16 means, maybe even giving an example from their own life, now you know they're really starting to learn. Okay, that's the difference. You want your students to be able to reproduce what they have learned. For instance, a child, it's important that they do copy work. We want them to copy the Torah. That's very important. And in fact, it's listed for kings that they are required to copy the Torah in their own hand. But does that mean that the king completely understands the Torah and is committed to obeying it and could explain the Torah in his own words? No. It doesn't mean that. Copy work is not the goal. Copy work is a tool to get you to the goal. You do have to know the original in order to put it in your own words or reproduce it. So you can't rush this. There is a place for copying things exactly. Absolutely. But that's not the goal. That's all I'm trying to say. And it takes time. This is why kindergarten through 12th grade is necessary to get so many facts in. Yes, you do want them to learn their multiplication tables. Absolutely. They should know them like this automatically, like we were just saying a little earlier. But to be able to explain why 6 times 8 is 48 is so much more valuable. You want your child to seek evidence for the knowledge that they have. In other words, you want your child to be able to give a reason for what he believes. And to be said in a simpler way, you want your child to know why. You need to understand what the Torah says, and it's great that you have it memorized and you can say it word for word, but that your child knows why God commanded that. And it's not always possible, I know. It's very difficult to search out some of these things, but do you see why that's a higher level of actually understanding? Peter says, we are always to be ready to give a reason for the hope that is within us. It's fantastic that we have hope, but if we can't put it into words for somebody else, we don't necessarily understand that hope very well, do we? Finally, we need to know how all of our information could be used in the world. The reason you go to school is not so you can get a diploma. The reason you go to school is so that you can learn how to use it in your life, so that you can actually live as an adult. That's the real reason. So you want your child to have knowledge, and then you want your child to have an understanding, that's knowing why. But most of all, you want them to have wisdom, and that's applying all of that in a correct way to a certain situation. That's the goal. Wisdom is the goal, not knowledge. Understanding's cool. It's a start. But wisdom is the goal. So, when we're learning something, I want you to stop and thinking about your kids for a second. Just think about yourself. How do you learn something? Well, first of all, you learn what the lesson says. You might read a book and learn something new. Maybe you're learning about herbs. And then you have to ask yourself, what did that mean? You might have to look something up in a dictionary and have a discussion with an herbalist friend. And then how would I say this in my own words? Well, you might go up to your husband and you tell him everything you learned. And in your own words, you're telling him everything that you read in that book. And you say, why is that true? And your husband asks you a question. Well, I don't know about that. I don't think that's actually true. So then you have to go and look it up in the medical journals and find out why that was actually true and give a reason back to your husband. But none of that learning about herbs is of any good if you don't actually use the herb and get better. So you could skip all the rest of it and go straight to the use, but then you might use it incorrectly and you might choose the wrong solution. So it is very important to know what knowledge is, what it means, how to say it in our own words so that we really know we understand it, to know the evidence for it. So we know that that's actually the right decision and then actually use it in our life. So for your children, let's think about what this looks like in education. What does the lesson say? That's reading it. That's copying and dictation. So those things are very, very important. We have to first get the knowledge out and start, putting it, presenting it. But second, what does it mean? We have to explain. This is where discussion comes in. And when the Torah says we have to talk about the Yehovah's commands with our children when we walk, when we sit down, when we rise up, when we lie down, that discussion is absolutely essential. We have to tell our children what things mean. We have to make sure the connections are there and they actually understand it. How do we know they understood it? Well, can they say it back to you in their own words? This is where they translate back to you what you said, and you confirm that you are using the same language, one with each other. And it doesn't have to be verbal. Some of this can be done by writing an essay or answering the questions at the end of a chapter. Then you need your students to learn to discern with all the tools available to us in 2021. How do we know it's true? This is a key step that I think a lot of Torah people, fall into conspiracies and go into crazy things because they never learned how to check evidence to compare one or two witnesses, or I'm sorry, it shouldn't be one or two, it should be two or three witnesses to make sure that what we are studying is true. Doesn't Proverbs say that every man sounds correct until another man comes along to question him? We have to know why we believe what we believe, and we have to prove evidence for it. So you have to teach your children how to use tools and how to study and how to use a scientific method and how to evaluate and discern truth from fiction. And then finally, what is the good of it? Do not let your children graduate and leave home until they know how to use the information that you've taught them in their daily life. That's the whole point. That was all the rest of it was to get you to that point. So when the scriptures say, "Hear, O Israel," at the beginning of the Shema, what we call the Shema because it's the first word, to hear, to Shema is really all of those steps. It's not just hearing, but it goes all the way through all 5 steps to the point of doing. Hearing is a really big deal. Now, keep in mind the age of your student. Maturity brings, as a child gets older and older, they ask why. So a baby, you teach them how to do something, but by age 3 or 4, they go, why? And you have to give them reasons. And really that happens in elementary level kids too. At the young ages, you teach them how to do math. But then as they get older and they have to start applying it to more difficult math, they ask why? And sometimes that's when it's difficult to give them a reason, and you'll have to show them how to use the tools and find out. It is incredibly important to move through all 5 steps, or your children will be like Eve, deceived. Do not just take the word of a textbook, but teach them how to back it up with the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, how to look up evidence and discern truth. And that's even true from the Bible. We know that the Bible is true. We believe that it is true. I believe that it is true. I could go on and on about how the word of God is always true in every word. It is true. But can you prove it? And if you cannot, you should take some time in your next school year to start learning how to prove that the word of God is true. Your children need to know why it's true, not that you said so, but why. What is the evidence for it? And that should be true of every subject that we talk about. But then most of all, don't neglect that application. Make sure that you apply it to their real, truly everyday life. That what are you going to use this for? We're going to, in conclusion, give you the law of review. That the completion and test of true knowledge is made by reviewing and applying it. What I just said about application and review. If you won't know something until you won't know your children know it until you reviewed it and reviewed it and reviewed it and applied it to actual circumstances that they have to do something with it. Why do we review? Well, there are several reasons. Number one, we review because it perfects the knowledge that we already have. If it's day 2 and you go back over something that you learned on day 1, that you perfect it. You find out if there are any weaknesses in their understanding and you can firm it up. And if let's say that it's year 1 and you're going through ancient history, and then you go to year 2 of history and you start back over at ancient Babylon, and some of that information you've covered before, but it's in a fresh new way from a new perspective. And so it firms it up and it makes it stronger. The second thing is to confirm that it's true. Remember, I was talking about 2 or 3 witnesses. When you review something, you're coming at it maybe possibly from a different angle, or different voice is telling you the same thing. In science, we might read and look up all the Bible verses about that scientific fact, and then we might look up in a dictionary what the words mean, and then we might go to several different YouTube channels and watch them explain it. And then we might do a science experiment so that we can see with our own eyes. And all of that review confirms that the knowledge was actually true. Thirdly, we review to make the knowledge ready to be used. Okay. For instance, you can teach that 4 times 7 is 28, but until you review it over and over again, that child doesn't have it well enough learned that they could use it at the grocery store when they quickly have to decide what 4 times 7 is. Did I say 4 times 7? I think so. I already forgot. If you want to have the knowledge ready, you have to review enough times that it becomes automatic. And that's a lot of review. That's not just 1 or 2 times. Don't expect your kids to learn it quickly. I think you could say 7 times or 7 times 70. It would be a better, a number of times that you have to review things that must be ready to be used at a moment's notice. And finally, if you're going to be able to use knowledge in your everyday life, you have to know it so well. You have to review enough times that you could actually apply it. So you can know that 4 times 7 is 28, but can you measure 28 and 4 times 7 in a multitude of ways out in the tool shop so that you can make an accurate piece of furniture? No time is more profitable in your homeschooling than review. And that's not how we normally think. We think that the lesson where we talk and discuss and explain is the most important part. But I actually want to say that the review is the most important part, because if your child can't bring that information up out of their deep recesses of their brain, then how did they learn it? How are they ever going to use it? So this is, again, why do we read the Torah every year? And the synagogues, as it says in Acts 15, it's read. Moses is read every Sabbath day. Why? Why for Sabbath after Sabbath for 2,000 years or more must we listen to the same thing over and over again? Why do we read our Bible through every calendar year? Because every time you read it, you see it with fresh eyes. You bring to light new things that you never saw before. As the days and the weeks go by and you talk about the same thing over and over again, maybe you have a word for your school year and you talk about that word every day for an entire school year. Well, as those days and weeks go by, you see things you didn't see back on day 1. And on top of that, you're at a new point of view. You've never lived through Thursday before and all of the events of Thursday, and Thursday might have brought some new experience that makes the topic more understandable than it would have been if you only talked about it back on Monday. The position of the observer has changed, quite literally. If you are examining, what's that thing about an elephant? A whole bunch of blind people trying to explain what an elephant is, and they're all touching it and feeling it. And one of them's up by the head, so they explain it this way. And one of them's down by the tail, so he explains it this way. But if the person who is blind could have explained it from every possible point of view before coming to the conclusion, they might have had a more accurate understanding. And so that's why review is so important. It's like ideas have to incubate in our mind. And this brings me back to that seed again. Things have to grow. It takes time for something to grow. And review has to keep happening through that whole time. Keep bringing it back up to the surface again, like a cow chewing her cud, bringing that grass back up again and doing it again, and then swallowing and then bringing it back up. And she's getting a lot more nutrition out of it than someone who just swallows quickly. What is a test? Well, a true test is to find out what the student remembers and is able to use and able to apply to a situation. Just rattling off facts again is not really knowing things. So a good test doesn't just have them rattle off facts. Those kinds of tests are more like a review in themselves. It's fine to use a test to just check facts, but it's not the end. And you don't know if the student really knows it. You just know that you've reviewed it that day in just a different way. And we called it a test. A real test makes sure that the student knows what he remembers and he's able to use it. This is why in Homeschooling Torah, we repeat levels in our math curriculum. So we have K and 1, and then 2 and 3, and then 4 and 5, and 6 and 7, and some people review it again in 8th. We review the same pages. They do the exact same worksheets again and again and again. It's not because we're trying to bore them, but because we're trying to make sure we had a chance to review. And the child is a whole entire year older with an entire year's worth of experiences that now could be related to that subject and connect the dots, and their understanding will be so much richer. So reviewing things over again is not bad. This is why you teach 4 years of world history when they're young and then come back when they're older and teach those same 4 years again. It's why you teach American history when they're young and then come back and they're older and teach it, but this time from the perspective of government and economics, because that review through something again and again and again really stabilizes it. They're going to have new questions to ask, new experiences to go, oh my goodness, I saw a movie about that, or I read a book about that. And now they can understand it. So when you're younger, lots of repetition, but as the child gets older, you're going to give a deeper restudy of the same information. And when they're even older, you're going to really concentrate on applying it. That's why I give a lot of papers to your older children and say, you know, as you're learning about George Washington and how he acted at Valley Forge, I want you to write a paper about the character qualities that you need to have in your life, just like George Washington. That's going to be pretty deep, and they're going to be able to use it in their life. This is the difference between someone who just makes bread from a mix that they buy at the store to an artisan bread maker who has been working in a French pastry shop for 30 years. This person over here has reviewed it over and over again and applied it to actual life for that whole entire time. I have a question though for you. How are you as a teacher going to remember to actually review all of this? This is the value of a curriculum and having a lesson plan, because you're not going to remember all this either. You're not going to remember that you wanted to teach that subject. And frankly, the curriculum writers, they don't even remember what all they were supposed to teach, because you can't. Your brain can't hold it all. And you do have a lot of things going on, distractions and stuff in your own life. So it's valuable to have a lesson plan to look at, to remember what it was that you wanted to teach, sticky notes to remind you, lists of things that you wanted to remember to talk about. Go ahead and write in your book when you have an idea, or write in your book what you talked about, so that in a couple of years, when you come back to that page, you'll remember what was discussed, and now you can add new experiences to it. This is why you highlight in books as you read them, and then go back and review all of the highlights, because it helps really firm up what you learned. This is why we use worksheets. This is why we do notebooking pages, which I love so much. And I hope you'll go. I'm going to put a link to the video about notebooking pages, because these are a fantastic way to review. To have your students list out all the things that they learned in that lesson. Well, who are all the people? And let's see if we can remember who all the people were we read about in these 3 chapters. And I want you to tell me something you know about that person. This is why you make tables of the kings of Israel and charts. This is why you make timeline books. This is why you make maps, many maps, so you have a very good understanding and you review constantly. But from the perspective and the connection of who you were talking about in history that day, you might make a map of Italy in geography that's entirely different from a map of Italy when you're discussing the first pope. And the different connections will really make that map of Italy stick. You make plans, you make drawings, you write down statements and sentences. Today I learned, and then write it in their own words. Little bit, some other time, today I learned this, and for these 3 reasons. And now you have a paragraph. Today I learned this, but I also learned that some people believe this, but I think they are wrong because the evidence says this. And now you have an essay. And then, of course, you could write a 10-page paper and so on. And then time to answer questions and ask questions and go back and forth. All of these are ways to review. The times of your lesson that you need to review at the beginning. You need to, at the end, review again and ask them to verbally summarize everything that you just taught them. That may not even be the end of the day, but maybe the end of a chapter in your history book, and maybe 3 chapters that you read that day. So you're going to stop and pause and ask them to verbally summarize. You can stop often and do that. After several lessons, like once a week or after a unit, do a good discussion and review. Even if it's not in the curriculum, pause and take a couple days to just do the review and then jump back into the curriculum. I think I would estimate that about 1/3 of all your time in school should be spent in review. So you can kind of gauge how close are you to that. Again, make haste slowly. It's not about finishing the book. It's not about finishing 180 lessons that are in the curriculum. It's about teaching your children and seeing that they actually learned it. When you're in the middle of a lesson, pause to reference something that you know they know. Encourage them to put their hand up while you're reading and interrupt you in a nice, polite, respectful way and ask you a question if they don't understand what something means. Pause to look up a difficult vocabulary word that might be in a chapter book you're reading aloud. Don't be too busy to do this review and discussion. So those are all the 7 laws of the teacher. And I wanted to point out that in Homeschooling Torah, our lessons are arranged according to hear, learn, keep, and do. And I'm going to put a reference to that below the video so you can go and find out more about what I mean. The hearing is to shema, to totally understand what you heard, not just to hear it with your ears, and hear it enough that you want to take action on it. To learn is to come back and apply it in many different ways and to come at it from many angles and to research the evidence behind it. To keep is to guard it. That means to review and review and review and review. That's where we put all the review stuff in Homeschooling Torah. And to do is where you actually have to go and think about how we would solve an actual problem with the information that we learned. Many times that's with a hands-on project or thinking about it in the real world. Home is the best place to do this. Your kids aren't going to be able to have the time to do this at church. In fact, at church, in your Sabbath fellowship or your synagogue, your congregation, or even your home fellowship, according to 1 Corinthians 14, the women and the children are supposed to be silent as the men talk. They're supposed to be respectful, only talking one at a time. You're not going to have the time or the ability to do all of the things that we just talked about, to, have the children in the middle of a children's story ask a lot of questions and go on and tell all of their experiences. That's not the time and the place for it. Home is the best place for this. Now you do have the time and the place. And when you're done with your lessons and you go on into the kitchen to make supper and you go and do laundry and you're cleaning the bathroom and you have to go get groceries and you're going to run to this co-op activity and take your kids to this gym day, those discussions can keep going. You don't have to stop just because you got away from the dining room table. But I also wanted, we're going to go into tonight when we come back in our last session for today. We're going to talk about how to actually plan so that all of this can actually happen, because I hope that I've actually made you feel a little bit overwhelmed at this point, because now I want to come back and make it practical. And how do you actually make a lesson plan for today and a lesson plan for a year and a plan of action long-term for an entire education of your children? Because without a plan, this is going to be really difficult. You even probably need to plan a schedule as to how you're going to get through your day and get all this done and keep your sanity. So I hope you'll come and join us back tonight as we talk about how to plan. So shalom, and I hope you'll check out the resources below the video just to kind of add a little bit more to what we talked about so you can review it in a different way. So shalom.